The closest I ever came to virality occurred on Twitter in 2021. I wrote this: honestly, conservatives make me more progressive, and progressives make me more conservative. Now, lots of people agreed. I had like 100 retweets, 1,000 likes, which for me was a big deal at the time. Many were fed up with their options, and you could tell that. But I did get some pushback, including by today's guest who cautioned me about taking that moderate, both sides are bad approach. And I held no ill will because that commenter was Christian Twitter celebrity Trey Ferguson, who, yes, is here today to share his positions about moderates. Trey Ferguson is a minister, writer, speaker, public theologizer. He holds an MDiv from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University, and he shares his thoughts through podcasts like Three Black Men and New Living Translation. And he has a book, Theologizing Bigger, Homilies on Living Freely and Living Holy. So we're going to discuss why we should reject centrism often as Christians, as well as how in that process we can avoid falling into that partisan trap either. Welcome to Christianity Without Compromise. I'm your host, Jake Doberenz, and in each episode we focus on Jesus alone and not the other idols we put in his place. Now let's start smashing those idols. All right. Well, thank you for being here, Trey. I do really appreciate it.
Jake, I appreciate the invitation, man. I'm humbled by that. And I appreciate your commitment to no hard feelings about that, because I promise you, I have no recollection of that. And if in any way I misrepresented your position, I'm sorry about that. I say that in front of the people.
No, because I appreciated it, because the reason I remember it from way back when is because... hey, like, I had to think about it. Oh, well, what does that mean to say, I don't like all my options here? Yeah. What's my position then? Do I step out and say, see you later, I'm going to go become Amish or something in the woods?
Right.
What do I do with all this? And so it's good to push back and say, hey, hold on here. I don't remember if you said this specifically, but like, hold on here. A lot of groups throughout history have said, yeah, I'm going to step this one out. And that usually ends up perpetuating injustices and things like that. So it's good to remember. And we'll get into that. So, oh man, well, a lot of places we could start. Let's go back to young Trey. Let's go back to your childhood before we get in too much deeper, because you told me that your dad in your younger years was a leftist organizer, which meant, he was often on the outside of organizations. Some people probably liked him. Some people probably didn't like that. So how does your dad's experience kind of explain how your mind is wired today, Trey?
Yeah, so the funny thing is, he was done with his organizing days by the time I was born. He had mellowed out quite a bit. But when I say like leftist organizer, I'm talking about, when people hop on Fox News and they start calling Joe Biden and Kamala Harris radical leftist or whatever. Like, no, they're talking. I chuckle when I see stuff like that, because my dad was the one spending weekends in jail, getting locked up for stuff like that.
Wow.
And it's funny because I knew some of this about him when he was alive and when I was a child, but I didn't know the extent until his passing. And I speak to his two surviving siblings about who my dad was and stuff. I was like, wow, I didn't know that he was really down for the cause like that. Like, I thought he was just talking. But my dad was an immigrant from Jamaica, was never a citizen as long as he lived, and could never vote because of that. But for some reason, always had like news on around the house. And so I'm sitting there listening to talking heads, which I think it's probably a bad decision. But nonetheless, it's what I was exposed to. And he was never short on opinions. And I didn't know what to make of him, because he passed by the time I was 14, right? So like, I didn't have the sense to really ponder what he was talking about or anything. But that was one of like the main influences of my life, right? Like that is helping frame how I'm understanding and perceiving the world. And for me, it's important to acknowledge that, because I don't believe that any of us can approach the world objectively. And so I name my biases out and out upright. Like, yeah, I'm the son of an immigrant, the son of a leftist and all that good stuff. And yeah, that does shape how I see the world and encounter the world. I'm not ashamed of any of that, but yeah, I let people know out front, like where that comes from, even if I haven't followed my dad's exact trajectory. Like some of this stuff I come by honestly, you know?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that is important to. I mean, I guess it sounds like it's a funny term to use, but to kind of center us in that history, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It does shape us, right? I think for me in college, one of the most kind of formative things was just to realize, hey, by the way, everybody kind of has a background history of bias. Like, we cannot escape that. You know, I come from the Church of Christ tradition,
Hmm.
which was very much that early American experiment kind of, what if we can just all read the Bible exactly the same if we just take all the biases out of our mind? It's like,
Right.
no, you actually
Yeah.
cannot do that. That's
It's not a
actually
thing we can do.
impossible.
Yeah.
No. So it's good to talk about that stuff, right? So, all right, Trey. Well, let's get to the meat here. Like, let's get to the main meal
Let's
here.
do it, man.
What's the danger of centrism? Why are you holding up a red flag here? What's the issue with being moderate? What's the issue of taking the middle ground? Tell us.
That's a great question. And I'll frame it like this, right? Centrism um, and being a moderate gives us the impression that we are being principled without actually requiring us to stand for anything.
Hmm.
And the danger, right, is not in there. Like that's just a critique. But the actual danger there is that because it's not actually committed to anything, but like avoiding extremes, it allows us to let others or to let the extremes dictate where we land, right? So if we're committed to being centrist, committed to being moderates, committed to being the bridge, if one side or one extreme drifts at a different time than another one, and we stay committed, we stay tethered to the center, we stay tethered to moderation. What that means is that we actually get pulled in a certain direction because we actually weren't standing for anything except for moderation, right? And so a great example of that right now is that as we see like a rise in certain right wing extremisms like Christian nationalism and stuff like that, and the mainstreaming of some of those, right? Like CNN doing profiles on Doug Wilson and how he's planning a church in DC or whatever.
Hmm.
As we see that, the people who are committed to centrism find themselves somehow more like right leaning than they would have without that, because at the end of the day, like, oh, well, yeah, they're doing that, but the people on the left are doing, but in reality, what they're describing is the same thing they've been doing for a while, right? And because they haven't made their commitments known to themselves, let alone anyone else, what happens is you end up like defending things that once upon a time you probably would have given a little more pause to, right? If you are committed to the center of a moving spectrum, it is hard to determine where your grounding is. And I don't mean that for other people. I mean for yourself. It's easy to lose your own self.
Yeah. So, like you're saying, like, yeah, the issue is that commitment to the middle, to the. I kind of used the term like checking out earlier, like that.
Yeah.
That's the problem of. Well, I'm going to try to not play this game for these both sides, but you end up kind of being dragged one way or another. I don't know. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of times when I critique centrism and being a moderate, people think I'm saying that we have to become partisan. And that's not at all what I'm saying.
Right.
I'm saying that you need to be committed to something and know where you land. And a lot of times your commitments will leave you closer to one end of a spectrum than another. But the idea that like, oh, I'm committed to the middle, I don't think that's a safe place to be. Right. And I think part of that is what you see when you see Jesus in Revelation saying that I'd rather be hot or cold.
That's right.
I'll spit the lukewarm out, right? Because like, what is this? This is tepid. What am I supposed to do with this? I'd rather you be clear on where you stand and make that known. And then, of course, we have like the historical examples, Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, where his strongest critique in that particular writing is for the white moderate. He says, at least we know where these other people stand, but like you sound as though you want to be a voice for justice, but because you haven't made any actual commitment to the sort, you actually serve as an obstacle in your pleas for moderation and waiting for the right time and your critiques of how to do this. You're not actually contributing anything constructive to this discussion. And I think that that's something we have struggled to sit with as a society, even in the 60 plus years since that letter was penned.
Oh wow, yeah. Well, let me summarize it this way. I think like the problem is being committed to non-commitment.
Yeah.
We need to stand for something,
Yes.
or
Yes.
else like what are we even doing here? So that's okay. Yeah, I like it. That's a good way to to frame that. Now let's dig into you. You already mentioned kind of you're not saying to be partisan. I mean, like so. Do we always have to take a side? Like in politics, we have a more or less binary choice. Republican or Democrat. Not everything like that is necessary. Not everything in the world is so. There's this side or that side.
Right.
Um, I mean, do we need to take a side? Is it always good versus evil? How do we live this out? If we're gonna not be committed to non-commitment, how do we commit and navigate the sides?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think asking that helps me articulate what's on my mind as we're talking about this, right? Because when we talk about like our choices here, Republican and Democrat, I was about to say joke, except I'm serious when I say it, that the United States of America has a conservative party and a far right party, right?
Mm,
That's what I say, right? And some of
yeah.
that is framed by, like I said, being raised by who I was raised by and stuff like that. And so when you say like picking a side, and do we have to pick a side? I don't think we do when it comes to partisan issues. When it comes to like justice issues, like when it comes to seeing, okay, there are some people claiming that they're being stepped on and other people denying that it's happening to them. No, you're going to have to pick a side when it comes to that.
Mm,
You're going to have to decide who you're going to stand with. And I would recommend meditating on who Jesus would stand with right there. Either Jesus was crucified or he's the one doing the crucifying is where I land on that, right?
mm,
But at the same time, like when it comes to partisan matters, when we're electing people and things of that nature, I don't believe in picking a side as in endorsing. A lot of times, if I'm participating in the electoral process, I'm reduced to picking the person that I would rather go to the mat with, right? Like I get to pick my fighter, I get to pick my
mm.
opponent, because either way, whoever ends in there, my job is to hold you accountable to your job, which is actually to serve the people, right? Like not necessarily. And some of this, my bias coming out right now. Like you're not here to serve corporations and whatnot, regardless of what the Supreme Court says about corporations being people. Um, but when I'm sitting there in the ballot or in the voting booth filling out my ballot, a lot of times I'm not picking a side. Which one of y'all would I rather fight right now, right? Like which I'm choosing my opponent, and I think that is a healthy, or maybe a healthier or more pragmatic view of those people who feel as though they're outside of the spectrum or not being represented wholly by either one of the parties. Because again, that's a sentiment I share. It is. But that hasn't led me to feel as though I'm a centrist or a moderate in any way, shape, or form, right? So when I
Yeah.
say
Okay.
that I'm politically homeless or whatever, I don't mean the same as somebody who feels as though like, oh, I'm an independent that's in the middle. Like, no, I'm an independent too, but I don't mean it in the same way. And so that's
Okay.
kind of what I mean. Am I making sense when I say that?
You are making sense. I mean, so my first presidential election that I could vote in was 2016. So
Okay.
I have had one particular presidential candidate that's been in every election that I could vote for.
Yeah.
And we use these phrases like "pick your poison" or something like that, and with the lesser of two evils. And I have always like really struggled with that because I'm like, lesser of two evils. I don't want to choose any evil. I don't want
Right.
to. But I like your framing. That's really interesting. Who would you rather be your opponent? Who would you take to the mat? Who do you think you could have more influence over, or something like that? I think that's a good framing of it that I'm going to have to chew on myself more to kind of help me wrestle with that lesser of two evils idea.
Yeah. And there's an extent to which you could argue that that's a distinction without difference, even though I would like for there to be a bit of a difference, because nobody likes the idea of picking the lesser of two evils. And at the same time, if we acknowledge that the system that we have, the system that we inherited, is inherently flawed on a number of different levels, and that because of the way things work, the way campaign finances work, and the fact people are running for re-elections, and the fact that we ended up in this partisan system that the first president tried to warn us against, and all of these things, like, hey, it's going to stink one way or another. And so the options are either to fall back and not participate, or to have some skin in the game. Me, particularly as a black man in the United States, knowing what it costs so many people for me to be able to vote, I take that responsibility seriously. That's not depression. Nobody's just like where I land on it. And I can't think of too many times where I've actually been excited about any candidate. But again, for me, it's like, I think of it when I'm learning how to play like a new version of Madden or NBA 2K when it comes out, and I got to figure out the controllers. And I kind of like get to be selective initially in the front end about who I'm about to play against, or you get to pick the level and everything. That's how I view voting a lot of times. Like, which one of y'all would I rather engage with on this level? And also on top of that, one of the factors that goes in there is, who do I trust to be more honorable about the social contract between us, right? And that's why, like, for me, you mentioned the candidate who's been on every ballot since you've been allowed to vote or whatever. A lot of that was a non-starter for me, because it's not even pretending to be bound by whatever little conventions we have, right?
Sure.
And so that's one of those things. Like, yeah, it was a non-starter. Like, some of these elections, I knew who I was voting for before I knew who I was voting for. No, I can't do that, right? Like, the moment January 6th happens and there's even a thought of putting them back in office, I was like, oh, we're done, guys. Like, that's something that you can't do in a society. Like, that is a disqualifying factor in any like civilized government society. That's a disqualifier. And the fact that it wasn't an automatic for us, like, oh no, we're in a dark place right now, or a dangerous place rather.
Well, let me ask this that I've been wondering, and I'm kind of like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but what I see so your thought, and specifically I know the background of the Intention Church, which you pastor, it kind of seems like this melding of like this kind of Anabaptist Mennonite thought, and then you kind of got your Black liberation theology.
Yeah.
And to generalize here, like, Anabaptists have a lot of times historically had a reputation for withdrawing from government or checking out. And you have, of course, the extreme version, like I mentioned, the Amish earlier, are that kind of Mennonite offshoot that were like, we're going to go way over here kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then, like, a lot of Black liberation theology, it's very much about leaning into politics, making changes, things like that. How do you kind of reconcile those sort of two approaches that I kind of see in your thought, if I'm coming from that angle correctly?
Yeah, I think there's a degree to which you're conflating like theology, which is more of a philosophical field, and then a praxis, because you're not all the way wrong in how these things have shown up in the world, like how the philosophies have led people to act historically. And for the most part, you're right. Anabaptists around the world, and particularly here in America, have set most of these things out. And that shifted in some Anabaptist communities and traditions, on the other side of the civil rights movement, where some of them, particularly so I'm affiliated with Mennonite Church USA, which is like a more progressive denomination for the most part, where they're committed to things like anti-racism and justice. They're pretty vocal about what's happening in Israel and Palestine and things of that nature, because after a while, the claim there, and how Anabaptists, we like to describe ourselves, Jesus is the center of our faith, community is the center of our life, reconciliation is the center of our work. And if those are our convictions, then how do we get to sit all of these things out? If we're called to be peacemakers, then eventually we got to get in this. And some people recognize that, we might have to adjust how we engage with the world. Now, on the flip side, when we start talking about Black liberationist field, the idea there is that the message of the gospel is liberation. Now, liberation, salvation, deliverance are all synonyms. And what that has meant theologically and in ecclesial spaces is an expression of, we need to examine the ways that we are still bound in certain things. And that hasn't always shown up in the civic realm, right? There are, of course, people who have married their faith and their civic engagement in way, like, of course, Martin Luther King being a notable example there. And there are other people who haven't in the same way, right? And so if we were to look at this in the aggregate, I think your assessment is probably what most people would think of. But if we look at this thing in totality, we recognize that at no point in like history of any one group of people been monolithic to that degree. And
Right.
so I think I probably represent an intersection that is, I'm not alone here in this growing. As a matter of fact, I call myself an Anabaptist, and I got that term from I got that term
Okay.
from Dr. Drew Hart, who's actually, matter of fact, shameless plug right there. He has a book. By the time this episode comes out, it would have dropped a few weeks ago. It's called "Making It Plain: Why We Need Anabaptism in the Black Church," and
Okay.
his work is like really incredible there. But yeah, I definitely understand the questions. Like, how do you make that work, right?
Mm.
And for me, it's been a real joy just because of the Anabaptist emphasis on making peace, on what that looks like, and also the Black liberationist emphasis on what does it truly mean to be delivered. What does salvation really mean and look like or require of us? Can there be salvation without safety, right? And marrying these trains of thought has really helped me reclaim a faith that at one point felt like it might have been slipping away.
Okay. Yeah. It was a really good conversation, especially kind of in light of a lot of conversations had on the show. I've had some Anabaptists that were very much extreme libertarianism, kind of in the anarchy almost realm, just saying, I don't think so. And for good reason. The Bible is not a super big fan of empire at all.
Right.
And recently we also had Joash Thomas in his new book, The Justice of Jesus, which has talked about a lot of the themes you've brought up today. His call to action there on that episode was, hey guys, advocate. He did not advocate partisanship either, but he said if you're on the side of the marginalized and the oppressed, you're doing okay.
Yeah.
Um, Advocate for not yourself, but for other people that need it. And so this is a good conversation. Like I said, an intersection of kind of those helping us wrestle with this stuff. I have a podcast, right? Literally selfishly, just so I can wrestle with these things and talk to interesting people and figure some things out because I'm a mess myself and I need to figure all this stuff out.
And we
So,
all, yeah.
yeah, awesome. Um, I'm curious about your thoughts of a statement that one of my professors in grad school said, because we've nuanced, I suppose, your view on centrism and the moderate and stuff. But I had a professor say that the truth is often found in the middle, and what he did was he showed both his hands and he put his fists together, like you would fist bumping somebody, and he kind of pointed to the middle of that and said, right between those two opposing, polarizing sides, that's where the truth is. And we've talked about it a little bit already, but humans love extremes. But his argument was the truth is often really nuanced, and I suppose that's one reason it kind of stuck with me. Of I wanted to be the center because the extremes are not, they don't have a monopoly on the truth. So
Mm.
if we're trying to, and maybe we can take it out of politics, that's only what's one realm this works. I don't know, if we're trying to be faithful to the truth and trying to wrestle with it, you've already said like you can't just full sail sign up for one party or the other. I don't know, what do you think of that statement? Is the truth found there in the middle? How do we
I
wrestle
think
with this?
that's I think that's a bit of a narrow definition of the truth, right? It presents the truth as something that happens in dialogue between two parties, and I'm not sure if that's enough to
Mm.
get a high definition picture of the truth. I think truth happens in community, um, which can be two people, right? It's the first community. God splits Adam into Adam and Eve, first community, but then got children and there's other people folded in there. And I think the truth has to be all encompassing in that way because, yeah, we'll have a fuller idea of the truth when we put your ideas in conversation with mine and we wrestle with those things. But then if we invite more people to the table, Jesus had at least 12 of his friends sitting at the table on the night that he was betrayed. And I think the wider that we can draw the circle and engage intimately with other people, the more high definition, the higher definition of an image we can get when it comes to the truth, right? So if we sit there and say like, oh, the truth is usually found in the middle, I would probably argue that the truth is more like all of around us. And that sometimes in looking at the person that you're bumping heads with, we can kind of take our eyes off of the truth a little bit, or maybe it's a little myopic in what we're looking at, because the truth might be part of the truth right there in the middle. And there's also, maybe we got to go back to back, get each other sixes, and there's more truth around us to be gained. Because I think at one point in time, I probably would have been more inclined to agree with that image and that statement as is. But the wild thing about technology is that we get to encounter more ideas than we ever have. Not all of them are good or worth encountering, right?
For sure.
But a lot of them have this way of expanding what we once thought possible or understood, right? This conversation in and of itself happening between you and I happened because, the world opened up in such a way that two strangers could encounter each other in interaction that, frankly, like I didn't even remember, but it sat with you for a little bit. But I think even if you take this into the realm of religion and Christianity, I don't know if the Protestant Reformation happens without the printing press. As a matter of fact, I know it doesn't happen without the printing press. Yeah. Like, there's no way. And so sometimes technologies, that's why I keep using the phrase high definition, because I remember like the old box set TVs, and then we had like flat screen TVs, and then the graphics keep getting higher and higher. We got 720p and then 1080, and now we're in 4K, and they got a 5K coming out and all this stuff, because eventually, like, we're able to see things more clear and more clearly, and that happens as we expand the parameters of community and invite more people to the table of creation. And I think that all of that is necessary for us experiencing the truth in its fullness.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm always a big fan of bringing it back to community. We talked about things like biases at the top of the episode.
Yeah.
And half the time we can only know that when we have other people saying, hey, you make that assumption. Not everybody thinks that way. And being able to discuss these ideas and come to truth together. So I appreciate that. So maybe let's end with just kind of a call to action from you. How do we speak truthfully and prophetically in this world that is at the same time wants to pull us to the extremes in many cases, and where there's also a temptation to hang out in the center? How do we make changes in this world that's trying to pull us in all these different directions?
We have to ask ourselves what love requires of us. And I don't mean love as in the sentiment. I mean love as in the commitment that we are called to embody for one another. I define love as the commitment to wholeness. And that's really the distilling down of a definition I once received, which is love is the giving of all that one is, has, and does for the positive benefit of another, expecting nothing in return. It's a long definition. I like short stuff sometimes, right? So I say that love is the commitment to wholeness. And one of the things that I have discovered, particularly as I get older and I got kids, my oldest child is already an adult, which is crazy. I'm not old enough to have adult kids. And I realized that me being committed to seeing them whole did not always feel good to them. And I don't mean like, I'm not talking about giving people whoopings and stuff like that. I don't even mean like tough love. I mean like, hey, I'm going to tell you something right now because I don't think that you're seeing the whole chessboard. Ooh. And it might be about how a relationship that they're pursuing it's not actually drawing the best out of them. It might be about how a choice that they have made or a way that they're choosing to engage a class is actually selling themselves short. But because I want to see you whole, I am going to have this conversation with you. My own personal philosophy and that stuff is I'm not going to make you do nothing. I'm not going to press you. I'm going to present you with this truth because I believe that you deserve to see what is possible for you. And then the invitation is always there if you would like to walk this path together. I think that is how God operates with us. Right? I think that's why the invitation that Jesus issues to the disciples is follow me. And then Jesus keeps on walking. Whether or not they follow is entirely up to them, right? And so when it comes to speaking prophetically, I think the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what might this person, what might this community, what might this institution look like if it were entirely whole, if it were reconciled to its creator, if it were to experience shalom, peace, right? What would that look like? And what is like the little graphs? We got to find the four differences in the pictures. Like, where are those differences? Can I speak to those in a way that, even if it's not received in the right way right now, in a way that I'm confident, like, no, I'm saying these things because I want to see, I am committed to your wholeness, right? And so I can love you even if I don't have like warm, fuzzy feelings about you. There are people I want to see you whole even when I don't like you. Because straight up, some of y'all are annoying, right? I don't mean you, but like in general, some people are annoying. But I still want to see you whole because I believe that God calls you beloved. I believe that God wants you to experience wholeness. And so as long as we have a view of salvation, of the reconciliation of the world, that is expansive enough to include people that honestly, it's some people when we get to heaven, right? And I see you there, I'm gonna be ticked off. Like, how you got in here, right?
Right.
If I can see you and maybe you're not my favorite person in the world, but still want to see you walking in the best of what God has for you, that enables us to speak truthfully about the things that actually wear us down and take us away from wholeness.
Well, that is a great definition of love. I really like that. I appreciate that. What a word. Thanks for preaching to us there. Really appreciate it. You'll get a chance to preach again in a second when I ask you that last question. But hey, take some time to point people wherever you want to point people. Books, podcasts, where you're hanging out on social media these days, whatever. Where do you want to send people?
Yeah, the best place to link with me is at pastortrey05.com. You'll find all of my social media channels over there. I'm pretty much all the places, right? I'm on X, unfortunately. I'm on Threads, Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, all that good stuff. But you can find all those links there. You can find a link to my newsletter, the Substack, the Sunday Move. It's also at pastortrey05.com. Both of the podcasts I'm part of, Three Black Men, New Living Translation. You can even find a link to Theologizing Bigger, Homilies on Living Freely and Loving Holy. All that stuff and more at pastortrey05.com. And if you want to get in contact with me, fill out the little contact form. I'll be answering.
Okay, that's really cool. Well, we'll definitely have your website in the show notes below. We'll put a lot of those links in there, and I'll probably put a link right to your book too, because I've gotten to read some of your book and I really enjoy it. Very fascinating. A lot of good stories, and your theologizing is great. Love it. Fantastic. And I really relate to when you talk about like how you could just turn everything into a sermon, and you talk about the spider web and all that. And I was like, yeah, that's how my mind works too. I'm glad I'm not alone.
Hey man, I appreciate you.
Lesson. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Trey. Well, let's get you out of here soon, but we got this final question. As we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
Yeah, man. Jesus, after having one of his road dogs after Peter denies Jesus 3 times on the night that Jesus is betrayed and all that good stuff. After Jesus is raised, says about the Sea of Galilee, he pulls Peter to the side of the disciples, the risen Jesus, and he asks them 3 times, "Do you love me?" And each time Peter kind of hedges. And if you look in the original Greek language, they use 2 different words for love. And Jesus encourages Peter to feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep, right? And so the practical action that I would offer is to feed the lambs in a literal way, right? My wife and I have a weekly standing date at Buffalo Wild Wings. It sounds like a corny place. They have a decent happy hour. It's close enough to where we both work that we can make that happen. And the other day, I was going in there, and it was a man who was he was unhoused and sitting outside the restaurant on the ground. And I got this thing where I don't like to do the thing where we stare past homeless people. So even if I don't have nothing to offer you, I'll at least like make eye contact and greet you and everything. You're still a human being, right? And so I did that. And he asked, like, do you have anything? I was like, no, I actually don't have any cash on me. Like, I'm sorry, which is true. I don't usually carry cash. He was like, hey, man, can you, like, give me some food? And I was like, you know what? I could do that. Right? And it's not like I'm balling or nothing, but between the fact that happy hour is cheaper and the fact that I got reward points and everything, so got some wings and I gave it to him. And that one little act, like stuff that me and my wife just do weekly to reconnect, just throw a little, basically what we pay for the tip usually. Of course, we still tip. They need that money. Tip your service, everybody. Mm-hmm. But right. We were able to bless that person. And for all I know, as a matter of fact, for what I do know, that was Jesus, right? What you do for the least of these, you have done for me. And so my encouragement is that as you go about your life and everything, that you find somebody to feed literally. And it don't have to be a homeless person. Maybe it's somebody who's in your community. Offer, like, hey, man, I'm about to go. Maybe it's a coworker. Did you bring lunch today? Do you mind if I treat you? Go and feed somebody. And it's not a matter of like showing off to bless that person. You might find a blessing that you need in any given moment as this world continues to wear down at our souls and everything. Perhaps in the act of feeding somebody, you might find your soul fed.
Yeah. Well, that is beautiful, and that's very practical. We can definitely do that this week, and to literally feed Jesus, as you were saying, exactly. Well, Trey, it's been phenomenal. Thank you so much for being on the episode today. Christianity Without Compromise is only as good as its guests, and we have great ones like you. Really appreciate that. I do want to shout out to everybody else. I like to give people a sharing challenge, just a reminder of where you can share this episode, who you can share it with. And today it'd be perfect to find your friend that says, yeah, I don't like any sides. Yeah, I want to hang out in the center. Maybe somebody that's using that kind of language. Throw them this episode. Let's get a conversation started. Let's try to parse out what are they exactly saying, where... How can they reframe things better? This is a great episode to kind of start that process. Can start a conversation with them, talk about standing up for your principles and standing on the right side of things. So that would be really great. And then, of course, rate and review and all that weird podcast stuff as well. But really, Trey, it's been fantastic. Trey Ferguson, everybody, has been on the show today, and we've had a phenomenal conversation.
Jake, I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Christianity Without Compromise. We just had a great episode, and I encourage you to put into practice the wisdom and advice that you received. Please subscribe to the podcast and newsletter at jakedoberenz.substack.com. That way, right in your inbox, every Tuesday you'll receive the new episode, and on Fridays you'll receive a newsletter written by me that tells a funny or interesting story with a spiritual point. This episode was recorded by me, Jake Doberenz, in conjunction with Theophany Media, my podcast production company. Please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to share your favorite episodes with your friends and your enemies. Thank you so much for all your support, and we look forward to bringing you another great episode next week.